Okay, I think we're live. It looked like it was freezing there for a second, but I'm assuming all's clear. So today we're just going to look at Surah 85, and it begins with it's called the Mansions of the Stars, or Al Baruj, the Great Stars, and it begins again with Allah swearing by the mansions of the star. Hi, Mark. By the mansions of the stars, and we've been over this already. The fact that this is something that's condemned in Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy 4:19, specifically, God, God um, tells the nation of Israel not to lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when they see the sun and the moon and the stars, not to swear allegiance to them. Hi, Love and Light and Miss Bluebird. Glad you're here. Not to do that. So we've already been over that. And also the fact that swearing in general is something that's repeatedly, it's something it's repeatedly prescribed. The best verse to the best verse in that case is Matthew 5:34, when Jesus says, "Swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, nor neither shalt thou swear by thy head, but let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay." And this is something Muhammad repeatedly does in all of the stories. He swears by the Quran. He swears, although in this case it's actually Allah, which makes it even more bizarre when you think about it. This is someone. This is a being that Muslims pretend is an all-knowing, all-seeing God, and the God is swearing by things that he created. It doesn't make a lot of sense once you actually subject it to critical analysis. But this is how the surah begins. I swear by the mansions of the stars and the promised day. Now, Muslims bring up the fact that Jesus, this verse specifically in Matthew, let me go there. In Matthew 24:36, Jesus says, and Matthew 24 is an explanation of what's going to happen in the future, the tribulation, the day of the Lord, and what Jesus' disciples can expect. And it's confusing sometimes because you have descriptions of things that did have already taken place. For example, the destruction of the Second Temple and the the sack of Jerusalem by the Roman Empire, and you have things that are going to take place in the future. So it's a very tricky chapter. But in verse 36 it says, "But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only." And Muslims use this. They they proof text this in order to claim that Jesus is saying that he's not omniscient, that he doesn't have knowledge of the future, and therefore he's not God, because they're basically saying only the Father knows, and Jesus, in their interpretation, is a servant of the Father, and he's a prophet, but he has no godly attributes, even though he's described as sinless and being born of a virgin. He's still seen as just a man. He has no. You shouldn't worship him, and you shouldn't set him up alongside Allah. And they use that verse, but they ignore all of the rest of the context of that chapter, just like they take out and twist Jesus's statement to the rich young ruler when he says, "Why callest thou me good?" And he tells him that no one is good except for God, and they imply that Jesus is saying he's not God, which the complete opposite is the case. So they use that verse to claim this verse in Matthew 24 to claim that Jesus doesn't have full knowledge, that he's simply doing that he's simply serving as a prophet and helping God, Allah, or God, and for them God is Allah, but that's not the case. But when you contrast it with Muhammad, when Muhammad talks about the day of the judgment day, he has no knowledge of it. He can't even he it's not that he can't tell people when it's going to occur. He can't even give you a vague idea of what's going to precede it. Now, there are all sorts of claims that Muhammad made that turned out to be false, that were actually discredited and proven wrong. And yet Muslims still claim he was the seal of the prophets, that he was an apostle of Allah, despite the fact that all of these predictions, almost none of them were actually borne out. But Muhammad, a lot of the things he did, a lot of the things in the Quran surrounding the Day of Judgment, there were snippets of it he cribbed from scripture. But again, it's distorted. It's being filtered through Muhammad's own weird prejudices and culture and his own inclinations. So it says, "And the promised day, and the bearer of witness, and those against whom the witness is borne. Cursed be the makers of the pit." And the pit is something that is biblical, and in Psalm, it's referenced repeatedly in the Old Testament. So in Psalm 88:4, let me just turn there. Psalm 88:4. This is Psalm of David, and he says, "I'm counted with them that go down into the pit. I'm a man that hath no strength." And the pit is hell. And the interesting thing is, a lot of the this psalm, among others, does have a prophetic element in the sense of prophesying elements of Christ's life, particularly on the road to Calvary. Now, Muhammad did his best to try to excise any sort of any parts of the biblical narrative that would lead people to conclude that Christ is the Messiah, is the Son of God. But the thing is, if you actually read the Bible, it's an inescapable conclusion. Even if you just read the Old Testament, or even if you just read the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, there are very concrete verses that hint at the redemption, the reconciliation that will be effected by Christ, going all the way back to Genesis and Adam and Eve being expelled from the garden. So, cursed be the makers of the pit, of the fire kept burning with fuel when they sat by it. Again, the hell described by Muhammad, just like the paradise, it's not really the hell depicted in the Bible. And even the idea of the bottomless pit that he describes, Muhammad says that it's guarded by 19 angels, and if you go to the book of Revelation, you have Abaddon, an angel guarding it, but it's just one angel. It's not 19, which is one of many numbers in Islam that has spiritual import significance. There are a lot of Muslims that actually try to create these weird, kind of like the Nation of Islam or other cults. They create these weird numerological. They try to craft these numerological arguments for the Quran's divinity. Muhammad had X number, lived X number of years, and if you combine the 22 verses in this surah and add it to the 25 verses in the preceding surah, then that proves that Islam is true. And it's a bunch of easily discredited nonsense. There's no real significance. Now, I mean, there are numbers. If you go to the Bible, there are numbers that have a spiritual significance that that represent completeness or finitude. The numbers, the type of numerology that Muslims use to justify the Quran, it's simply a way of ignoring the fact that so much of it is demonstrably false. I mean, there's so many. The book itself is complete with errors, historical, scientific errors, scriptural errors, and these are just easily proven and easily accepted by anyone who is not a Muslim. The problem is that Muslims don't do critical analysis. There isn't really a critical commentary on the Quran written by Muslims for obvious reasons. So it's hard to get into a discussion with them when you point out these errors, and they just go back to very time-worn tactics of deflection or attacking the Bible, even though the Bible is given credence by Muhammad. It's really, it's kind of a losing battle trying to engage in a debate with people who aren't willing to accept just basic facts. So anyway, the pit. So in verse 6, it says, when they sat by it and they were witnesses of what they did with the believers, and they did take vengeance on them for aught except that they believed in Allah, the Mighty, the Praised. Now, I'm going to talk about this when we come down to verse 10, but basically this story is going to describe people who were supposedly the people of the ditch who were burned alive or burned by fire and there are various traditions as to who this refers to. Some say it was Du Nawas, a Jewish Yemenite king. Others say it was another king, but basically he's invoking this to try to draw a parallel between people who are following Muhammad and accepting Islam, and they're going to be rewarded, and the people who reject it are going to be sent into hellfire. But again, so are Muslims. They're going to hell too. Perhaps for not as long as non-Muslims in the Quranic, in the Islamic eschatology, but they're still going to experience hell on some level. So continues, whose is the kingdom of the heavens and the earth, and Allah is a witness of all things. Surely as for those who persecute the believing men and the believing women, then do not repent, they shall have the chastisement of hell, and they shall have the chastisement of burning. And the context of this is the treaty of Hudaybiyah, which was a treaty drawn up between the pagan rulers of Mecca from the Quraysh tribe, from Muhammad's tribe, and the Muslims who had made the Hijra and were living in Medina. So this was a treaty which allowed them to freely worship in Mecca. And a lot of Muhammad's followers, particularly Umar, were mad at this, and they saw it as a concession. Why should you bow down to these pagans? And his justification, and this is the Muslim justification for making treaties today. You see this when a jihadist group like Hamas makes a hudna with Israel. They use this justification. They go back to the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, and Muhammad's justification was this. This is an expedient measure until we have the power to go and defeat them. And Allah has given this to me as a revelation. He said this is okay. Therefore, we can enter into this treaty where we're subservient, and it allows us to go to Mecca and to go into the go worship our God. Therefore, it's justifiable according to Muhammad. This is how he justified it. This is how Muslim terrorist groups and sometimes Muslim nations justify making treaties, unfavorable treaties with kafir and with basically with non-Muslim nations like Israel or the United States or whomever. They justify by saying, well, Muhammad did this because of a revelation from Allah. It's in the Quran. Therefore, we can use this until we gain enough strength. Because that's also a Quranic injunction to never allow non-Muslims to hold Muslim land and to reclaim Muslim land. And this is why you have jihadists seeking to retake Andalusia, Al-Andalus, Spain, or retake or turn Turkey back into an Islamic theocracy. But the problem is with the Treaty of Hudaybiyah is that the Muslims were the ones to break that treaty. Muslims claim that it was broken by the Quraysh because one of their allied tribes attacked one of the Muslims' allied tribes. But the truth is the treaty was broken because Muhammad refused to abide by its terms. He refused to return a woman who had become a Muslim to her family, in spite of the fact that it was stipulated that they return these people to Mecca or Medina, respectively. And he refused to abide by that. So basically, he broke the treaty, and then later on, Muslims retroactively put Muhammad, the Quraysh, as the treaty breakers, but that's not what actually happened. So this is referring to that. That's the context. That's a very long-winded way of grounding this. So surely, as for those who believe and do good, they shall have gardens beneath which rivers flow. That is the great achievement. Surely the might of your Lord is great. Surely he it is who originates and reproduces, and he is the forgiving, the loving, Lord of the Arsh, the glorious, the great doer of what he will. Has not there come to you the story of the hosts of Pharaoh and Samud? And this is the Pharaoh and the Samud, the Arabian tribe that was supposedly God took out his wrath on them for not obeying him. And 19, it says, nay, those who disbelieve are in the act of giving the lie to the truth. And Allah encompasses them on every side. Nay, it is a glorious Quran in a guarded tablet. And this is one of the key concepts of Islam, the idea that the Quran is that the Quran has always existed. It's eternal. And as I've said 1,000 times since the series began, this is something that conflicts deeply with the concept of Tawheed, or what Muslims call oneness or unification. This idea of having a sole unitary point of worship in the form of Allah and not associating anything with him. So if you believe that that the Quran is eternal, it means the Quran is on the same plane as Allah. This is one of the reasons that people who advocated this, the eternality of the Quran, were persecuted in the Abbasid Caliphate. They were put to death, even exiled, executed. Nabil Qureshi discusses this in his apologetics text, No God But One. And he explains that this is what happened. I mean, Muslims have a hard time reconciling the idea that the Quran is eternal with the idea of Tawheed. They're mutually contradictory, and that's one of the reasons that people who proclaim the eternality of the Quran were persecuted until they weren't, and then people who rejected the eternality of the Quran because it violated Tawheed, they were persecuted. And this just exposes one of the fundamental contradictions of Islam. But that's the Mansions of the Stars, another surah about Muslim eschatology. And Surah 86 is the next one, the Nightcomer. That's a short one. I might also do Surah 87, combine them in the next video, but we'll see. Anyway, thanks everyone for coming. Mark, Miss Bluebird, Love and Light, Matthew, and everyone. Like I said, share the video. We're coming to the end, so it would be great if there, even more people got to see this series and became more familiar with the Quran itself and had some arguments to use in debating Muslims, particularly online. But thanks everyone. Have a great weekend. I'll see you soon.